Our series is I Need a Miracle. The theme today is the miracle of following. God calls us to follow, and what do we do about that? You know, one of the key features of the story of God in the Bible is that God is always calling people to lead where He directs. And it starts right away in the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 1, where Adam and Eve, they hear a simple call from God. And what do they hear from God? Don't eat the fruit of that one tree. Pretty simple, right? Straightforward. How can you mess up following God at that point? But they do. And sometimes we just miss the point of what it is to follow God. And I guess with Adam and Eve, and for all of us, I guess you could say it's just human nature, temptation, Satan trying to misdirect us. But from the very beginning, God is calling people, and people are kind of missing the call. But in the Bible, when we teach these Bible stories to our kids, there are many famous people of faith that hear the call of God, and by fits and spurts, they kind of get it right as they move through their life. And remember these stories, and these are the stories we teach the Sunday school kids down in Luther Hall. The stories of Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Jacob, Moses, the shepherd boy David. You've got big prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah. In the New Testament, of course, you have the 12 disciples. You have St. Paul. And we teach these stories to our kids in Sunday school. Why do we teach these stories to our kids in Sunday school? Because we want every generation to have the tools that are needed to realize that God is calling. And to be able to somehow develop the reflexes within that we can respond to that call of God as God is calling. Now there are others in the biblical story, not these famous people of faith where we teach their stories, but there's others in the biblical story, people in general who listen to these famous people of faith and follow them because God is speaking through these great people of faith. And I'm thinking here in particular of that great crowd that followed Moses through the wilderness. Remember that story? It took them a while to figure out how to follow. They failed their first test, but then they were given 40 years to figure out how to get it right. And how do we know they learned their lesson through those 40 years? Well, the second water crossing is our first reading today that George shared with us so well. The first time they crossed the water, it's the Red Sea. Remember the story? And it's self-evident what they must do. There's not a whole lot of decision to be made because you have Pharaoh and his army bearing down on them. He is going to kill them all. Moses lifts his staff, and remember the story, the Red Sea parts. Dry land. So what are the people going to do? Well, of course they're going to go through the water, the dry land, because Pharaoh's bearing down the other direction to kill them all. Not a tough decision to follow, is it? Not at all. The second water crossing, and this time it's across the Jordan River to get in the Promised Land. This is 40 years later. There's more of a decision to be made here. Because the water doesn't just stop with a staff raised in the air. Did you hear the reading, how the water stopped? The priests, they were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, carrying the holy power of God. In fact, it was thought there was so much power of God in the Ark of the Covenant that people followed a half mile behind it. That was a part of the reading. But the water is parted as the priests walk into the water and they put their sandals down. And every footstep they take, the water stops. Now, this is the Jordan River at the time of year when it's at flood level. You ever seen a river when it's flooding? I mean, it's a terrifying force of nature. And so the Jordan River is ready to flood its banks. It doesn't just stop, but rather the priests walk into it one footstep after another in order for them to proceed to the Promised Land. In other words, each footstep is a faith decision. Following God means that we take footsteps forward, and those are faith decisions, aren't they? And with footsteps and faith decisions and not knowing what the future is, you risk getting wet or maybe carried away by the flood waters. But when we follow where God leads us, the risk is worth it because the miracles of God that follow are tremendous. You and I, like the people of God in the Bible, we've been called to follow. And God's call to us is always intensely personal and just tailored, designed to who we are, who God created us to be. And some of us are called to be pastors and leaders in churches. Others are called to be teachers, nurses, physicians, those in the helping profession. Some people are called to be in business. Some people are called to be in government. Many of us are called to be a spouse or a parent or a son or a daughter. These are all places where God calls us. And the miracle is both in the call and in our response to the call of God. The miracle is in the call. The creator of the universe steps out of his supernatural world, if you will, stepping into our natural world with a call designed for us personally to help us move into a future. And the miracle is in our responding to the call. We become different people because God has something for us to do if we say yes. When God calls a man or a woman, it is no small thing. This is a big thing. God's call to each one of us is a big thing. Now, sometimes we make it smaller. As we try to move into the future, we might make the call smaller by saying, well, I go to church, and that's enough. Or I'm trying to be a good person, and that's enough. Or sometimes we think back to our baptism 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and we say, well, that's enough. But when God calls us to follow, it's no small thing, and falling back onto cliched phrases or cliched thinking is not what God has in mind for us. The great German Lutheran pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer talked about cheap grace and costly grace. And as I read him, maybe the best way to understand cheap versus costly grace is cheap grace is when you start in your journey, whatever your journey is, you say, well, I've got grace and it's enough. It's enough. And you don't really put your heart into following. And for Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he would say costly grace is after you've prayed, after you've tried to follow, after you've wrestled with the Holy Spirit, after you've done everything you can do, after you've spent sleepless nights trying to discern God's will, then you fall back on grace. You see the difference? Cheap grace is a cliched phrase. Costly grace, we understand something in life experience about moving forward with God. And at the end of it all, we can say, it's grace that keeps me going. King George V years ago wrote this in a Bible that he gave a friend. I like this saying. The secret of happiness is not to do what you like to do, but to learn to like what you have to do. Learning to like what you have to do. Too many of us think that happiness is found by seeking and searching, sort of like kids thinking there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and once we get there, we'll be happy and we'll find meaning. Happiness is not that. Happiness is found in following. Maybe learning to like what you have to do because God calls you to do it, and then you move forward by faith, one footstep after another. Happiness is a process of following, I think. Let me give you an example about following. Let's say one day you decide you need a European vacation. And you call up your travel agent, and the travel agent tells you what airline is going to fly you to where you want to go. And you do your research. You want to make sure the airline is a reputable airline. You want to make sure the aircraft is good. Maybe you do some research and decide the crew and pilot are excellent. And then you get a ticket because you think this plane can get you across the Atlantic. And then let's say you go to the airport. But you still, having done all this, you haven't got across the Atlantic yet, have you? You haven't done that. You only do that when you get on the plane. When you commit yourself to it and you trust it that it will get you to your destination. Following Jesus, it's like getting on that plane and really doing it. Following Jesus is like putting one foot in front of another, even if it looks like the flood waters are rising right before you, but you just do it. Following Jesus, as we find in the gospel today, following Jesus is casting your net back into the water even when you know you can't catch any fish. And that's what Simon Peter does. Now, Simon Peter is a professional fisherman. He's good at this. He has a small business. He's a small business owner. He supports his family. He is, I'll tell this story on myself, he's not like me, an amateur fisherman who doesn't catch much. I remember probably the largest fish I ever caught was when I was fishing with my daughter and she had her Kermit the Frog fishing pole with her. We were up in Idaho fishing from the dock at my in-laws' place. I was teaching Kelly how to fish, just a little bitty thing, and she was bored to death. She said, Dad, what are we doing here? This is boring. You don't do anything. I said, well, that's the point. You just kind of sit here with a pole in the water. You don't do anything. So she left for a while, and she left Kermit the Frog on the dock with a baited hook in the water, and I pulled in a fish on Kermit the Frog. And she came running back, and she was so excited. It was the biggest catfish I've ever seen. We pulled this in on a 3-foot-long Kermit the Frog fishing pole, and she was so excited about fishing then, she said, let's do it again. And I got the hook out of the fish, and the fish is on the dock, and she cast the reel again, Kermit the Frog reel, and I had the treble hook in my hand. The second time she caught Dan. So that's really the extent of my great fishing. The point being, Simon Peter is a professional fisherman, and they were out all night. They were fishing exactly where you should have been fishing, and they caught nothing. Zero. The nets were clean. Jesus came up and said, Simon Peter, let's go out on the water, and I've got to share a message. I'm going to use the boat like a pulpit, and by the way, while we're out there, go ahead and cast your nets again. Let me read from the Bible here and give you something you can write in your Bible. I like to do that as we go through these series. When Jesus finished speaking, he said to Simon, push the boat out further to the deep water, and you and your partners let down your nets for a catch. By now it's sunny, and a professional fisherman knows there are no fish. We were here all night. This is Luke chapter 5, and you might want to make a note or write it in your Bible now in the margins here. Write in there the miracle of following. Things happen when you listen to Jesus. Master, Simon answered, we worked hard all night and caught nothing, but if you say so, I will let down the nets. They let them down and caught such a large number of fish that the nets were about to break. So they motioned to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. They came and filled both boats so full of fish that the boats were about to sink. When Simon Peter saw what had happened, he fell on his knees before Jesus and said, go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. And then what does Jesus say to him? He says, Simon, don't be afraid any longer. Follow me, and we're going to fish for men and women, and we are going to change the world. The miracle of following. And what happens? They go out and they change the entire world. Why would Peter throw out his net again? Because Jesus said so. He didn't say, well, I failed already, I can't do it, I'm stuck in the past. Jesus said so. Like for you and I. Why be stuck in the past? Yeah, we maybe failed. Yeah, maybe we didn't do well in the past, but the future is ahead of us. And if Jesus calls us, why wouldn't we listen and throw out our net again? When God calls and we follow, miracles can happen. When God calls a person, it's not a small thing. And cliched thinking and phrases are not going to help us by saying, well, I try to be a good person, it's enough. I go to church once in a while, it's enough. Or I was baptized decades ago, it was enough. No, when God calls a person, it's a big thing. And God wants us to follow. And our lives can be changed as we follow. And things can happen that are not explainable in the natural world. We open ourselves to miracles. By saying no to God, we close ourselves off to what God can do for us. But when we say yes, we open ourselves up to God who does tremendous things in our life. What is God calling you to do today, this week, this season in your life? Does God want you to risk the floodwaters to move forward and maybe put one foot after another into what could be really risky business and you could get really wet? But does God want you to do that? Or does God want you to cast your net again? And you've tried again and again in the past, and you feel like a failure and it doesn't seem like anything's going to work out. But when God calls and we follow, miracles can happen. And we can step into the floodwaters and not get wet. And we can cast our net again, and something can happen good that didn't happen in the past, because God is a part of it. When God calls us and we listen, it's not just us doing something, it's us and God. That's a great partner to have in your life journey, us and God. When God calls and we follow, miracles can happen. Why? Because your partner is God, moving into the future. And yes, we might say, I don't want to get wet. And yes, we might say, well, I've already tried and failed, so I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to cast that net. But why not? Why not try it with Jesus? He's calling you. And He's calling all of us in different areas of our life. In our journey, in our seasons. If God is calling you, and God is calling you, learn to follow. Jesus once said, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, then big things are going to happen for you. So I pray that God will give us eyes to see and ears to hear. And we might hear and see God in our life who calls us to follow, and then great miracles can happen. And those miracles are not just relegated to figures in the Old Testament, figures in the New Testament. God steps into our life today. And I think we all need a miracle, and I think there is a miracle, or there are miracles involved with us following God, or hearing the call of Jesus, and doing what Jesus wants us to do. Amen.